So if you ever want to ask a plant scientist a question, this is your chance to ask Dr. Orvis anything you'd like. And we would love for you to be able to ask those questions by just adding comments to the comment section for what your questions are. So even start adding those now. It takes sometimes a moment for the question to get through to us. So you can start posting those questions now, and even as she's talking, you can add your questions along the way. Okay? Excellent. Lisa, go ahead and you can introduce our special guests.
All right, drum roll. This is not only a great plant scientist and horticulturist. Dr. Catherine Orvis is a huge friend of the Junior Master Gardener program. She works with the Junior Master Gardener program at Purdue University. She's on faculty there and teaches horticulture and plant science. And she also works with our extension programs there. So we are thrilled to have her to be able to share a little bit about what she does. So we're going to let her share some pictures and some things that she's worked on. And then after she finishes, we're going to come back and then we're going to field some of your questions that you have for her about the work she does and what it's like to be a plant scientist. So Catherine, thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you for having me. Thank you for that great introduction. We're going to share, my screen needs to get shared. So let me click that on there and we're going to go on screen 2 and share. Voila. Now you can see some fun pictures. So let me talk a little bit. Looks great. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about how I got to be a plant scientist and how I got to be Dr. Orvis and how I came to be at Purdue. So I grew up on a small farm in Upper Michigan, and for those of you who don't know, where Upper Michigan connected to Canada and Wisconsin. And so some pictures that are here are some pictures of my favorite things from the farm. My dad has a little plane, and we like to fly around and check out what everybody's doing in the neighborhood. So that's pretty cool. It's an old farm, and we mostly just did things for fun there. We did 4-H and some other fun things. So I graduated from high school from a little tiny school called Mid-Penn, which is near Perkins, Michigan, if I have any Michigan people on. And then I went to Michigan State University, where I got my bachelor's degree in botany and plant pathology, but I also was in a residential college called Lyman Briggs. So if you are a Michigander and know Michigan State, know Lyman Briggs is one of the residential colleges. I went on to study plant breeding and plant genetics at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. So this top picture is finishing my degree, and this picture of my parents and graduation. And how I came to study plant science in general is I had to get a job when I went to college. And so I didn't want to work in the cafeteria washing dishes. And so I went and found a job in a lab. And I got to work with a PhD student who was teaching a class on plant breeding and plant genetics. And so I started working with him, and it got me hooked on working in the lab and working in the greenhouse and working with plants. And so while I started college as a pre-med major, I changed my mind and decided I didn't want to do human medicine, but instead I was interested in plant science. And so that's a little fun story of how finding a job can sometimes lead you to where you need to go in your life. The bottom picture is my first PhD student that I graduated, and this is on campus, and this was the day we did graduation. And so now my next set of slides are a few of my favorite things. So I went to Purdue University after I graduated from Wisconsin. And I've been here for 20 years, and I teach the Introduction to Horticulture course, and I teach ag teachers, pre-service ag teachers, and I teach them about how to teach with plants. And I also work with the Junior Master Gardener program in Indiana and with 4-H and Extension. And so I've got to do lots of cool things in my life. I'll tell you a few things about some of these fun pictures. This is my son and I last summer at a conference in Idaho, and we got to go to Yellowstone National Park. So this is my son, Wesley. This is him when he was a little younger on the farm with his favorite dog. This is my brother when I got to go to a conference to present my work in Peru, in Lima, Peru, in South America. This is my brother. And then these are my favorite pictures from Lake Michigan, because where I grew up is a few miles from Lake Michigan. And so I spend a lot of my time in the summer there. My favorite dog, Abby, and she likes to swim in our pool. And then our two kitties, Little Bit and Socks. And that's one of our rare moments where they actually like each other. Normally, they are chasing each other around the house. And in case you missed it, up here, there's a little Green Bay Packer logo. So again, if you know your geography and you know where the UP is connected to Wisconsin, I actually grew up a couple hours from Green Bay, so I am a diehard Green Bay Packer fan. So these are a few of my fun things to share with you, some of my favorite things. And so a few things about what I do and how I kind of got to be a plant scientist. So in Wisconsin, I worked in a lab where we studied onions and carrots and beets. And we looked at the genetics and how to create improved versions of those vegetables, things like having more flavors or having more color. So in carrots, we were working on carrots that had more orange color, and the orange color is the part of the carrot that's good for you. That's the beta carotenes and carotenoids. In beets, we were looking at beets that had more color, because the color from beets can be used as a natural food colorant or a natural food dye. So if you ever get yogurt and it's pink yogurt, sometimes if you read the ingredient list, it'll say red, it'll say beet pigment or red beet dye, and it's natural pigment that comes from table beets. And then in onions, we were looking at how onions are good for you. So you may have heard that onions and garlic have some properties or things that make them good for you. And we were looking at, can we study the genetics and figure out how to get more of those compounds into the onion that are good for you. And so those are the things we got to do in Wisconsin. And it was pretty cool. And so when it came time for me to graduate with my PhD and find a job, there was a job open at Purdue where I could teach people about what I'd learned and teach about different things. And okay, so the dog's barking in the background. I don't know if you can hear that or not. And so good times talking from home. She's running through the house. So I wanted to be able to teach people about some of the things that I had learned in my PhD. And so because I did a lot of work with genetics, it allowed me to, in a unique position, to be able to teach other people about genetics and about how plants grow and how we can use plants to teach people things. And so teaching about different ways that we can use plants in the classroom, ways that we can use plants in the garden. So lots of you are talking about some cool things that you're growing. What are the kinds of things we can learn when we have plants available to us as a teaching tool? And so that's really some of the things that I have done while I have been here at Purdue. So we wanted to talk about some of the different genetic things and related to vegetables. So I thought it would be fun to show you some pictures, a couple more pictures, and talk about how do we get carrots with more colors? How do we get beets with more pigments? How do we study how onions are good for you?
Hey, Dr. Orvis, I just wanted to
those
chime
are
in.
my, yeah.
I was going to tell you that some of the questions we're getting asked right now are what's on deck for you. And so the first question of McKinley wanting to know how colored carrots are made. So
how are colored carrots
things
made?
Occur, right?
Yep. So how do we get carrots with more colors? Well, carrots actually occur in nature with different colors. And so people have collected those carrots from around the world, and we can use those to help sort of take something that maybe has a really nifty red color or really pretty purple color and figure out how to make it taste good and grow well so that you can grow it in your garden at home. Um, Normally, when we talk about making carrots have more color, we do cross pollination. So we take some flowers from one carrot plant and some flower from the other carrot plant, and the pollen gets transferred. And it can be with insect pollination. And so we will let those plants pollinate, and then we'll collect the seed. And we make selections that grow from those seeds. And what we can do is we can find then certain carrots that have a higher color, or would do the same thing with beets. We used to grow beets, and we would have a whole row of beets in the field, and we would pull them all and lay them down, and we can look for different characteristics. Are they darker red? Are they a different shape? Do they have a different top? And so we can do that. Okay, so a couple questions about what makes potatoes purple, what makes carrots orange, what makes vegetables different colors. So plants will use the pigments that give them color as defense mechanisms. They will use them as ways for them to store food. But in carrots, for example, what makes carrots orange are they're called beta carotenes and carotenoids. That's the orange pigment. And then we have yellow pigments and red pigments, and they all have fancy chemical names, but plants will make those naturally, and they'll make them as part of their different ways that they grow in different environments and different places around the world. And so they actually come in natural colors, and we can use those colors to help make new varieties. Just like you go in the grocery store and you see a Red Delicious apple and a Granny Smith apple and a Honey Crisp apple, they're all different, what we would say, varieties. We have the same thing in vegetables. We have different varieties of carrots. We have different varieties of beets. There's yellow beets, there's red beets, there's red and white striped beets. And then we have red onions, yellow onions, white onions. And so you just have a mix. That's how they come naturally. You want me to tackle another question, Randy?
No, that's good. Go ahead and share your thoughts there. I just wanted to share
Okay.
McKinley's question because it was time with what you're talking about right
Yep.
at that moment. So we may chime in with some other questions if they kind of come in.
I see there's a couple in here that have said, how do I tell what's a male vegetable and a female vegetable? Well, the vegetables so I could give you a whole Hort 101 lecture about different plant biology and how we have different parts of the vegetables. But in carrots and onions and beets, they both have both male and female flower parts in their flowers. And so we don't normally eat the flowers in carrots and beets and onions. We eat the root or the bulb, right? In carrots, we eat the root. In beets, we eat the root. In onions, we eat the bulb, and we don't eat the flower stalks. But we use those to make seeds so that you can grow some the next year. So we can just cross-pollinate those, and we do that a lot through what I call traditional breeding, where we would traditionally just cross-pollinate, get some seed, and then make some selections. There's ways for us to do look at things on a cellular level or on a smaller scale than the whole plant, and that's a whole lot more interesting technology that we can use in the greenhouse and the lab, and some of the cool ways that we can look at how plants grow and understand how they grow. Other questions?
Dr. Orvis, I don't know if that was your last slide or not. So if you want to hit some other slides, you can do that. But I wanted to ask one question before I lose this thought, because I did some research on you, Dr. Orvis, and I saw that you had a reference to Lego building and genetics. And so I wanted you to make sure that you make reference to that, kind of how those connections of putting blocks together are kind of connected to plant genetics.
Okay, so we can study how we're able to study plant genetics is because we can look at the DNA that makes up plants and makes up any organism on the planet Earth. We can look at human genetics, we can look at plant genetics. We can do that by looking at the DNA that's in the cells. So by looking at that DNA, we can learn things about them, and we have to learn the order of the DNA. So what's the order of the base pairs that make up the DNA? So some of you who are maybe in middle school or upper elementary school, you've at least talked a little bit about what the DNA is in the cell and what it means. And so you can use Legos to represent those DNA base pairs. Legos come in 4 colors in the base packages. We have lots of cool colors of Legos now, but the base package of Legos is red, blue, yellow, and green. And we can use those to match those 4 base pairs in DNA. So A, C, T, and G. And I can use those to teach students how DNA sequencing works and how we learn the order of an unknown piece of DNA in order to be able to study it. And so we can do that with Legos. And that's one of the teaching approaches that I use is how do we make analogies or how do we make simulations or animations that simplify things that happen at the cellular level that we can't see with our eyes into something that you can visualize either in an animation or using Legos or something like that. Is how do I help you see what's happening at a cellular level so that you can understand what's happening and understand the plant biology. So that's
and that is very cool. On this slide,
yeah.
Dr. Orvis, we see some pictures of your students. And so you're saying
Yep.
if some of our junior master gardeners on the call today, if they come to Purdue University and take your class in the future, they'll get to play with Legos in your class.
Very possibly, yes. You can. These are some of my undergraduate students, and we grow plants in our horticulture course. And this was some of their harvests that they had in their giant tubs that we grow at the end of the semester. These are actually some of my ag ed students. And then the giant pea in the corner is a giant metal sculpture that we can grow plants on in our pea that we use. And we use it for a event on campus called Spring Fest that we sadly didn't get to have this year, where we feature all of the really cool things we do in the College of Agriculture and some of the other colleges across the university. And so one of the things that my undergraduate horticulture club students do is they put on a plant sale and they grow some plants, and then they grew the plants that were on the fancy pea here in this picture. So I really like to teach, and I really like to teach my students about why plants are really fun and cool. And so I could talk to you about that all day. But we don't have all day. So what other questions can I answer for you?
Catherine, talk about your students. What's one of the most interesting or exciting projects that some of your students have worked on recently?
Wow. That's a really good question.
Project?
There are a handful of some really cool things. So the current PhD student that I have, who's almost done, was looking at, can we use an urban gardening setting, and it actually was a camp that the students did in the summer, and these are actually middle school and high school students, to teach them about healthy eating, to teach them about entrepreneurship, and to improve life skills, which are all the things that we focus on teaching in 4-H and junior master gardeners. But we were doing it with some high school students in an urban setting where they're in a socioeconomic status in that neighborhood that is struggling, and they're struggling to keep students and residents there. They move away when they finish high school and college and trade school. And so how do we help them see where they can have entrepreneurship opportunities in their neighborhood? And how do we get them to see that they can learn themselves how to eat healthier, how to, they really improve their life skills, and it helps them think about what they're going to do next with their lives. And so that's what he is working on. So he interviewed a bunch of people, and we surveyed some people, and we went and visited their farm. And it's a really cool process to watch those youth develop and really are very passionate about growing their vegetables and their food and how they can sell them at the farmer's market and how they can start businesses and those kinds of things. So that's one of the projects that I have right now. Yeah.
There's a couple of questions.
Okay.
Ashley wanted to know if you're an expert on plants or flowers or both. And Maria wants to know what grows well in Michigan right now, vegetables and flowers.
Okay. So vegetables and flowers, what was the first question again?
If you're an expert on plants or flowers or both, and then they wanted to know what grows well in Michigan.
What grows in Michigan right now. So I am an expert in plant science, and plants include both flowers and vegetables, and sometimes the flower and the vegetable is the same plant. So I guess I consider myself an expert in how to teach people about plants. So yeah, both. I would say both. And what grows well in Michigan right now? It depends on what part of Michigan you're in. We just had and I'm in Indiana, a couple hours south of the Michigan border in Lower Michigan, and we just had a hard freeze a week ago where we had temperatures down to 26. And so that's way past the last frost date. We shouldn't have freezes at that point. And so in Michigan, we are doing cold season crops right now. So things like spinach and peas and potatoes and radishes, things that tolerate the colder weather. And if you're in the northern reaches of Michigan and northern parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin, you probably have a few more days to wait before you can put much out, because when we had a hard freeze here in Indiana, my brother who lives in Upper Michigan had snow. Wow. So yeah, plants don't grow well in snow.
Here's a plant breeding question for you.
Okay.
This is from Mindy. She wants to know, can you breed two different plants in the same family, like watermelon and cantaloupe, into one plant?
Usually, if they're different species, no. So cucumber can't cross with watermelon, cantaloupe can't cross with cucumber, because they're different species. And in order for them to be different species, they have to be genetically different enough from their relatives. So cantaloupe and watermelon and cucumbers are all closely related to each other. They're in the same plant family, but they're different enough that they're their own species. And so you cannot interbreed between those different species. Now, where things are closely related, sometimes there's, depends on how close genetically related they are. Sometimes you can make some crosses across very closely related species. There's some peppers, for example. There's lots of species of peppers, and there's some wild germplasm that you can actually cross with the peppers we know and familiar with. And apples are the same way. You can cross a crab apple with a regular apple, but it really depends on how closely related they are.
Catherine, we had one of our kids ask if that was peas growing on the giant pea. And we also had somebody ask, we had somebody ask if the purple corn they see in their farmer's market, is that example of just a naturally occurring color, or is that something that's been selected?
Okay, so peas are not growing on the giant pea. The giant pea is some ornamental leafy plant that grows nice and tolerates growing in the weird conditions around the structure of that pea in order to be healthy. So it's actually rather tricky to get plants to grow around that giant pea. And then purple potatoes are naturally occurring, and there are probably versions of purple potatoes that people have selected and brought that are easy to grow in your garden. Potatoes have a fascinating history and lots of what we consider to be wild relatives in South America. And so when you go in South America, there's many different kinds of potatoes, and we don't grow as many here as they do in other parts of the world. So probably they have been selected for so that they grow well here in this area. But purple potatoes occur naturally. You can find them growing all over the world.
Catherine, that same question about corn too, purple corn.
Oh, purple corn, sorry. I got lost between potatoes and corn.
That's-
But yes, purple corn also does occur naturally. You can
Okay.
get different colors of corn. But the purple corn that makes your blue tortilla chips or those kinds of things has been selected and improved so that it grows in an environment where they can harvest it and turn it into blue corn chips, for example. And so they've been selected and crossbred so that they are able to produce them commercially.
Okay.
Catherine, McKinley asked a question. They want to know, what is the biggest plant you could grow in an Idaho garden?
Goodness gracious, that is a good question. So Idaho has similar growing conditions to most of the Midwest. It depends on where you are in Idaho, if you're in the mountains or if you're down in the valleys. But I know in parts of the country that they've been able to grow things like giant pumpkins. And so I'd say probably the biggest thing with lots of tender loving care is probably growing the giant pumpkins that we have, that you can see pictures of and find pictures of. We actually have a contest at our state fair in Indiana for a giant pumpkin contest to see how big people can get them to grow.
That's fun.
Hey, Lisa, we'll
Malaya.
ask one more question. I've seen this multiple times.
Okay.
What is your favorite plant that you've worked with?
My favorite plant. Well, my favorite plant, I really like sunflowers. Those, because you've seen those featured a few times throughout. And so I grow some in my garden. But I really did enjoy the work that I did at Wisconsin with the onions and learning about how to study those and how to grow them and how to breed them. So yeah, I think that's my answer.
Catherine, Malaya asked a question about onions. Is there a type of onion that won't make you cry?
So there are onions that are less pungent. So the word to describe the scent and flavor or strongness of that onion is called pungent. So there are onions that are less pungent. So the kind of onions that we would grow in Wisconsin or Michigan or New York that are the round, really papery onions that you sometimes get a whole bag of them for like $1, are very, very strong, and they store for a long time. So I can sell those out of storage all winter so that you have onions in your grocery store all year round. And then there are onions like the Vidalia onions that come out of Vidalia, Georgia. And there are some lovely Texas sweet onions that are similar, that are very mild, and they don't have nearly the strong flavor and the strong pungency that those hard storage onions do. But the Vidalia onions don't store as well. They don't store as long. They tend to get squishy and not last as long in storage as the other ones do. So yeah, there are.
Well, there's one last question.
Okay.
Ada wants to know, how do you determine how much water that a plant needs?
So I teach my students, and this might sound kind of funny, is I teach them that really the best way to determine how much water a plant needs is to touch the soil, and if it's dry, to water it. So that is a really simple answer, because every single plant has a different water need, and we can group plants that need a certain amount of water, and another group of plants might need more, and another group of plants might need less. So you think about cacti or cactuses and different plants that would grow in the desert need very little water, and plants that we grow in our garden need I guess what I would say just an average regular amount of water here in the Midwest. And then there's plants that live in the water, like water lilies and those kinds of things, where they literally have adapted to living in the water. So I think it varies depending on the plant, but the best way is to monitor the soil moisture.
All right, we can see everybody now. Dr. Orvis, thank you for your time today. It's really kind of cool to get some insight into the kind of work that you're doing. We appreciate your love for plants, your passion for teaching. but the really kind of cool connections you have to making vegetables better for us and making them more colorful, and how those dyes are used for other products a natural way. That's just very cool. So we thank you for your time. We thank you for your contribution as our Junior Master Gardener State Coordinator for your state, and kudos to Purdue University for letting us have you for a half hour today.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
we're good. Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was fun.
And
So one cool thing that we're doing for, go ahead.
just remember, it's a great opportunity for you to kind of explore things that you might think about doing when you grow up, because, you know, Dr. Orvis kind of started thinking about that even as a young person. And that's something that you have the opportunity to do, is to explore interesting careers. And there's all sorts of things out there that are really cool and interesting, that involve a lot of fun science and interaction that really impacts people's lives in positive ways.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, so one cool thing, Dr. Orvis, we're doing, since it's our second to last session, that means our last section is next time on Tuesday, and that's actually our JMG graduation session. And we're going to be featuring some cool things that some of our kids have done, one of which is our kid compilation. We've already got some great ones of kids around the country sharing portions of the Plant Parts Wrap. So we'll share that next week as a part of that graduation time. But we also want to feature some of the other service projects that our kids have taken part in. We've talked about some of those a little bit earlier in the session. So if you would like to have your service that you've done, whether you're doing something for somebody nearby, or teaching a little brother, or sharing something you've made, whatever it is, if you'll post that to your parents' Facebook, or have them post it for you with the hashtag JMG Kids Service, or email it to our juniormastergardener@gmail.com address by the end of the weekend, it'll be likely that we can include that in our features that we're doing for our session next week. And the last thing, Lisa, and then I'll let you finish this up, is if you haven't already signed up for our session, one of the things we're going to be doing in our last session is having our kids graduate. And one of the things that we're going to be sending to our parents is these certificates that are the graduation certificates. You can see without getting chopped off.
So parents, if you have not signed up, be sure that you've done that. We'll send an email out on Monday about how to print your child's certificate. And so if you haven't signed up yet, it's not too late. You can do that from our website. There's a link on the very top. It's jmgkids.us/fblive. And there's a Google form where you can sign up, and that way we can email your certificates to you for your kids. So we are so excited. And again, a huge thank you to Dr. Orvis for being online with us today. And also a huge thank you for our team behind the scenes. We have a lot of our JMG staff, both here at Texas A&M University, and some of our A&M AgriLife Extension staff, as well as our university partners with Cooperative Extension all over the United States that have been a part of these and have answered questions. So a huge thank you to all of our friends in Extension that have helped us to be able to do these.
All right, so we'll see you guys on Tuesday, the same place at 1 p.m. Central Time. Thank you, guys. See you next week.
Okay. Thank you.